Welcome to Lake Christian. I am Brian Link. Today I want to do something a little different. I want to do Twin Cities radio history. Why? Because I grew up in Minnesota and I did work in radio a little bit. It's been a long time dream of mine to be in the media business and to own a radio company and do some of my own content, including a new batch of radio dramas, some live comedy challenges, and if I ever get the ability to own multiple stations in multiple markets, I would love to bring back the idea of live and local, personality-driven content, both the music stations with DJs and, picking, if not all of their own music, at least some of their own music, and, having a conversation around the music. The book that I kind of tried writing more, but never really got there. Ole and Emma in the Mornin. It's available on my website, rwnb.com/Ole and Emma. Now, it's not a secure certificate, but it's just text. I assure you it's on a reasonable server and all that good stuff. It's just my secure server certificates I have on other sites, and RWNB is just kind of a holding site for me for now, but got a lot of ideas I would love to pursue in the radio business, and I love radio history, and I just wanted to take a chance to share some of what I remember. Now, the redandnader.com website had a lot of gossip, some true, some not. There's various radio blogs, Radio Insight, for instance, that I like to read. North Pine is a local Minnesota, mostly, but upper Midwest based radio and TV. I've watched, YouTube videos on the media industry in general. There's not a whole lot on the Minnesota. There's some interesting stuff on the Minnesota scene. But, radio, I think, is somewhat of a dying format. I think it can be revived if there's more live, local, unique programming, more personality-driven, less of the national, satellite, syndicated, automated formats. And maybe I'll be part of changing that someday. I don't know. So right now, I'm doing this YouTube channel, doing a lot of kind of religious stuff because I really believe in family values, family-friendly, and whatnot. But radio has just always been a fascination of mine, so is the TV market. But I've read the Wikipedia pages of most of the stations. I'm just kind of doing this off the top of my head, just kind of reminiscing about the things that used to be. Now, I could bore you with every station, probably in all sorts of miscellaneous details, and I don't necessarily have every fact memorized, so I'd probably be off on some of the dates. But some interesting things in the Twin Cities radio market. WCCO AM 830 has been a talk station for all of my life, and probably slightly longer than that. And it's been primarily live and local all day. AM 1500 KSTP used to be primarily live and local all day. It was the station that Rush Limbaugh was on in the Minneapolis, Minnesota market. And so talk radio has done well in the Twin Cities. The public talk radio station KNOW has been a pioneer in the public radio sphere, and Lake Wobegon, which is it was a Saturday show. I mean, it no longer exists, but oh man, why am I forgetting his name? I hate when that happens, especially when I'm trying to do this off the cuff. But A Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor, there we go, was a staple for a long time. A lot of the programs that are on National Public Radio and Public Radio International and other services and American Public Media comes out of Minnesota Public Radio. And they have currently 3 stations. They have the KNOW News Talk format. They have, and that's at 91.1, originally 1330. KSJN 99.5 is their classical music station. and they have 89.3 The Current, which is a triple A station, triple A adult album oriented alternative, and it's kind of an all over the place type of station. So there's some interesting history around Minnesota Public Radio, and there's some interesting history around KSTP. KSTP, the Hubbard family, they have, of course, KSTP TV, and they were in the radio business a long time. KSTP was actually a merger of two other stations back in, I believe, it was 1927. But I want to get into some fun facts. Okay, right now, the two top-rated stations are KTIS FM 98.5, which is a Christian contemporary radio station with all live local personalities, and I think that's one of the reasons why it does so well. There's some other reasons, I think, that we can get into, but NKSTP FM, which is all live local personalities, and I think that's what radio is missing today. We just don't have that live and local touch, and I think, the music that a station plays obviously has an effect. What their competition is and all that has an effect, but so for many years, KDWB was and still is the top 40 station. It's currently at 101.3 FM. It originally started on AM 630, which is obviously no longer its home, as the stations that were on AM migrated to FM. But back in the day when it started in the 60s, the 630 frequency had been other programming, and then the company, I believe it was Doubleday, excuse me if I forget all the details, when they bought the station, they flipped it to top 40, but prior to the launch, they did an advertising campaign, and now the slogan of the radio station once it was launched was Formula 63. And a local drugstore chain, Snyder's, did advertisements for this magical formula that was called Formula 63. And they actually bought ads on a competing radio station, which was at the time the big top 40 station in the market, AM 1130 WDGY. And so Formula 63 was supposed to be this health elixir that was coming out that was going to make all your problems go away. And so the day of the launch of the station, the broadcast company had an arrangement with Snyder's that there'd be free samples of Formula 63. So they had bottles with little slips of paper in it that had basically a scroll inside that said, "Tune your radio to AM 630 and have a good day," or whatever it was. It was kind of, something cute and hip, a little more than just the basic. But anyway, so it got people to turn on their station. Well, of course, people at AM 1130 WDGY were very upset, and they banned Snyder's drugstore from advertising on their station for several years. But Snyder's had a cozy relationship at that point with the new station in town, 630, and that was, in the day before FM. I think FM maybe was out there, but there was few stations populating the dial, and it's not where the money was. And you had the rules back then. You could own basically one station in town. You couldn't own more than one. That all changed in 1996. So there used to be a lot of local competition between various broadcasters, and you'd get even the smaller stations that were kind of suburban and whatnot would even compete in the mix and get some listeners with unique live and local programming. In fact, the book that I've worked on that I've kind of ran into a dead end with, but it's out there for the public to read, rwnb.com/Ole and Emma. I don't have a secure certificate for the page, so you get that little warning. Just ignore that. I assure you the site is fine. But anyways, It's about a retired farm couple, who ends up being morning show hosts in this fictional town of Holy Cow, Minnesota. And, so I love radio. And, so I even wrote a story about it. And I'd love to do radio dramas, partly based around those people and some other things. But radio is maybe a little on a decline now. Still, a lot of people listen to it in their cars, but young people just don't listen to it the same way that people in the past listened to it. Like Radio Disney shut down its operations because there just wasn't the market for it that there was in the past. Which is kind of sad. I think Radio Disney did some good things. So, speaking of Disney, I think this is an interesting thing. If you look at the Wikipedia page for WGVX 105.1 and its sister stations 105.3 and 105.7, it tells a lot about Twin Cities radio history right there, because Disney back in '96 bought Capital Cities ABC. Maybe it was even a few years prior to that. And Capital Cities ABC owned a few radio stations in the market. And, after the law had changed to own where companies could own more than just one FM and one AM station, they bought out their competitors. So KQRS was for a long time the number one or number two rated station and had a huge line share of the audience. WCCO for many years with the live and local talk had upwards of 20-25% back in the 60s and the 70s. And then eventually that went down when KQRS started with their classic hits, or classic rock format, and Tom Bernard came on the scene. They got some traction, and they were number one for a long time. And that station was eventually sold to ABC, which was eventually sold to Disney. And there was some new competition forming, and it was hard. Radio stations will often have flankers with the allowed multiple ownership. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But a good example of a flanker is the 105 frequencies. Initially, you had 93.7 along many moons ago was WAYL, Beautiful Music. Well, when the whole beautiful music, easy listening thing died out, it went through a few different things. 93.7 after was Whale, and I'm probably missing a step or two along the way. I know Super U. No, Super U wasn't on that station. They were on a different station. But that gets confusing because AM 980 and FM 93.7 were sister stations at one time. And Super U was on both 101.3 and AM 980, which if you look at the old tuning dial, basically they're both right around the 100 mark, 100 AM and 100 FM. Super U 100, they played top 40, and they did their unique thing. And, this was before my time. KDWB took over the FM spot when they bought the frequency. They already had AM 630, so they couldn't own 980. WAYL bought 980. Of course, that's kind of a rabbit trail. But so 93.7, they were for a while, I think, KXLK. Classic rock, classic hits, and they were trying to compete. And I actually liked that station. It was only on for a few years, trying to compete with KQRS. Now, KQRS, I think, had a little harder edge, and a little, they weren't really hard rock, but they had more of that edge that I didn't like as much. And but that station, the KXLK, didn't do as well as they needed it to, and eventually they flipped formats and they went to a hard rock format. 93X, the original 93X. Little trivia, the current call letters of the station are KXXR, but the first version of 93X was KRXX. And what happened is 93X started taking market share from KQ, and they were successful. And the Disney, now the exact ownership and exactly who bought what when, I don't know exactly, but I'm just going to call anything that ABC did and some of the stuff that happened after just Disney, just to keep it simple. KQ was the cash cow, and they wanted to keep the cash cow. So they bought 93.7, which was 93X, a hard rock leaning station, or active rock as it's often called today. And they wanted to get that audience. So they flipped it to something called 93.7 The Edge. Now, The Edge was an alternative format. So what was, because in the 90s, the whole grunge alternative scene was really getting big and getting some prominence. So the Edge was an alternative format that they were running. And so the station became something different, and the idea was to have a flanker. So KQ was still the money maker, and then they would have a different line of programming on 93.7. And then what started happening is some people from another station that had existed, 104.1, had many different, over the years, formats, and it kind of came and went, and they had an alternative format at one point. And some of the people from that station wanted to reinvigorate, so they founded something called Rev 105. And Rev 105, like I say, WGVX is the 105.1, and I don't even remember what the call letters are for the 95 or the 105.3 and 105.7, because they park call letters from other markets on those stations, and it's been a while. But so anyways, basically the station, the people, Cargill, actually, the big conglomerate that is the the food manufacturing, farming, agriculture company. One of the Cargills had a radio division, and they bought some AM stations, and they also bought this FM station, and eventually they bought out 2 other FM stations, and they formed a trio called Rev 105, and it was a very personality-driven, live and local, with unique local music, sponsoring unique local events and whatnot. I didn't get into Rev 105 so much because I think it was a little more edgy and all over the place than what I preferred. I really didn't get into the Edge either, because at that point I probably listened to KS95 because I was used to listening to that, and they had a hot AC, still do have a hot AC format. And they didn't play like the rap songs and whatnot that I didn't like, and they didn't play the alternative stuff or the hard rock or the stuff I didn't like. They had in my mind, a good mix of music, and they were the highly rated station, and they had, again, live and local personalities. Anyway, so 93X went away, was replaced by the Edge, and then eventually Disney bought out Rev 105, and they brought back the X format. For a while, it was X105. And the reason why some of these companies are buying and formatting stations is because what the competitor is doing. Because at the time that 93X, the first 93X, was successful in taking away market share, they wanted to protect KQRS 92.5, so they did. And they switched the format to something that was more, helped their format better, but as other competition popped up, it was actually beginning to hurt 93.7, and they were taking market share. But that was a minor concern because they were on smaller frequencies and they didn't have quite the audience. But what did really have an effect is it was Clear Channel at that point, but what is now iHeartMedia. They had just bought a station, which was a country station, and they already owned a country station, and they didn't want to keep two country stations in the market, so they flipped 100.3, and there's some history here, was Bob FM. Now, many parts of the country may know Bob FM has a adult hits station, but the original Bob FM was a country station in the Minneapolis market. And if you go to the Wikipedia page, you can probably find that. I don't know what exactly it's under, but there's a Canadian company that started the Bob FM brand, and it was kind of a similar story with Jack FM. But Bob FM, WBOB 100.3 was actually, this is where it gets, how do you give all of this radio history, and there's so many interesting facts. 100.3 for many years was a non-commercial Christian station playing a kind of a very old-fashioned type of Christian music, one that I don't personally enjoy. But the company that bought 100.3 from them made a deal, and they bought an AM station, and that format still exists today on AM 1030, which also has a lot of history, has WMIN. But I could rabbit trail all day, and I encourage you to look at the Wikipedia pages of all these stations. But so 105, Rev 105, Disney bought it and brought back the X format because Clear Channel, what was now called iHeartMedia, turned 100.3 from country into hard rock. Originally it was Real Rock 100, and then eventually it's just Rock 100. And they had this funny little jingle on Rock 100. We are Rock 100.3 in the north, 100.3 in the south, 100.3 in the west, 100.3 in the east, 100.3 everywhere in the Twin Cities. And that's because the 105s had 105.1 in the south, 105.3 in the north, 105.7 in the west. And that was because they were all smaller stations, which were never really meant to be main metro stations. So to get the whole metro covered, that's why they had the three stations. And those stations all started out as independent entities that one company, Cargill Communications, bought. But Cargill couldn't make enough money, and basically the argument that Cargill had was there was just not enough room in the market for an independent operator to be profitable with all these other stations owning multiple frequencies. Anyway, so he sold out, and then they did also still own Club 14, KLBB. That, again, interesting story there with KLBB. But so Disney brought back, they call it X105, X105.1 in the south, like I said, north. And then when that started making some success, they swapped frequencies, and they put 93.7 as one of the 4 X frequencies. And then after a few weeks of simulcast, maybe it was even a month or two, whatever, but somewhere around a month or whatever, they took the X and made 93X 93X again. Now that, and they did something else with the 105s, which we'll get to. So they took the 105s, so they took the 93X, and this time it was KR or KXXR, and that because they had the three frequencies originally, KXXP, KXXU, KXXR for pure rock. They did that, and then they just kept those call letters on the 93.7 and the KEGE. They just let those call letters go. Maybe they moved them to another market. I don't know. I don't remember off the top of my head. But so they had those. So what was called the Disney Wall of Rock. And with the 105s, they went back to alternative. And they had something called Drive 105, which was kind of like Rev 105, but it was more of a light alternative, like an adult alternative. And it was, I really liked Drive 105. Let's see, first it was Zone 105. And then Drive 105 was later because they flipped formats. It was called the Disney Wall of Rock because they had the classic rock, their big station KQRS. They had 93.7, which was the active rock, hard rock station, 93X. And then they had the 105s, which was alternative. And to not cannibalize 93.7, they made it so the 93.7 that was the new 93X was kind of a mix of the old 93X, which had a little more of the hard rock flavor, and the Edge, which was the alternative, was kind of a mix of the two, with active rock leading with a little on the alternative side to avoid overlapping too much with KQRS, the classic rock, with a little bit of new rock, but really strong into classic rock. And Tom Bernard was the morning show host. Currently, the morning show host is a drummer from, it was the White Stripes, I'm sorry, it's been a while since I read it, but Tom Bernard was the host for like nearly 40 years, 35 years, what have you. And he was quite popular and got a lot of ratings, and they made a lot of money on that station, and that's why they did what they did. So, other radio station flankers. We could get into the shortest radio format in the Twin Cities, if not ever, totally, certainly for a while. As I mentioned, the 104s had changed formats a bunch, and they had some success with Jack FM, and I think they're still doing pretty well with that Jack FM adult hits variety format, and I kind of like the format. But anyways, so I don't like necessarily the jockless thing, but I like some of the music they play. Now, I don't know what they've been doing since I've been out of Minnesota. When I come back, occasionally I'll turn it on. But anyways, so 104.1, CBS Radio, which is now Entercom, which is now Odyssey. And no, it's not Whit, Connie, and Eugene. It's a different Odyssey, different spelling. I just find that funny that they picked that strange name. They had radio.com. That was the best name in the world. We can talk about their bad choice to call it Odyssey. It's kind of an odd choice at some other point. But so they own WCCO. They own 104.1, which is Jack FM. For a long time, it was The Point, and it was a few other things before CBS Odyssey bought it. And there was talk of switching the format of 104.1. By the way, they also own 102.9, which is currently country, but for many years it was Light FM, WLTE. Side note, I think one of the reasons why KTIS does so good is there is no mainstream AC station in the Minneapolis market. Love 105, which is the current 105 format, kind of that way, but it's more leaning softer and oldies. But okay, so Jack FM was potentially going through a format change. Now, this was before 102.9 went country. It was still WLTE. WLTE still did a little better than Jack FM, even though they were struggling at that point. And, you know, eventually they pulled the plug on WLTE and went country. But the Jack FM started doing a promotion. It was called The Last Song. And they were advertising this date where they were going to be playing the last song, and Beware the Bear is Coming. And everybody thought that it was going to be country, probably classic country, The Bear. And the last song on Jack FM was going to be played, and they had this time. Well, KOOL 108, currently 107.9 FM, KQQL. They're currently doing pretty well in the ratings. They're normally like number 2, number 3. They do really good during the Christmas season. They're oftentimes number 1 or number 2. But they were not doing as well back then. And there was always a plan that, because of this whole flanking thing, like I told you, Clear Channel, which is now iHeart, owned 102.1, K102, the big country station in town. They bought 100.3, which was also country, which was beginning to kind of pick up pace. Now, the reason they bought that station was more of a national merger and acquisition of other companies. But nonetheless, they had 2 country stations, so they flipped one to Howard Stern, like I was saying, and that was the big, you know, battle. And Tom Bernard actually won over Howard Stern, won the few places. And old Howard actually apologized to Tom Bernard for being just a little too nasty, and that format eventually changed. But so I was talking about 104 and the last song and Jack's happy ending, and that was going to be a big thing. So the thought was KQQL 107.9 would change from oldies, you know, the pop oldies, the 50s, 60s, 70s oldies, and now that's more 70s, 80s, 90s, but nonetheless, back then it was still leaning 60s and 70s oldies. They were going to switch to classic country to flank for their 102.1 station if anybody else went country. And that was the plan. So they took the day that Jack was going to have its happy ending was just a big prank. And what they did is they played, you can probably find it on YouTube or whatever, Eddie Bear, an artist who did a song, and it was called The Last Song. They played The Last Song, named The Last Song, from artist Eddie Bear. So that was The Bear is Coming. And the happy ending was they were promoting a new, they were going to have bookends at the beginning and end of your work day. So you'd have a happy ending. You could listen to commercial-free music for 104 minutes or whatever it was. Both in the morning when you went to work and on the way home in the afternoon. And so this big run-up on 104.1. And then they played The Last Song by Eddie Bear. And then after, there's a little pause. And the Jack announcer voice said, "What? Did you think we're changing formats or something?" "No, we're not changing formats. We're just..." And then they announced this happy ending, you know, bookend promotion. So meanwhile, over at KOOL 108, at the time, Dan Donovan, who was on KSTP, KS95 for many years, was on KOOL 108 for many years at that point, and his show took a pause, and because they were ready to dump the format and go to classic country. So, and the plan was it was going to be The Wolf. And so they played whatever, you know, oldie song they played, and then The Wolf howled, and then they played Charlie Daniels' band, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, which was kind of a crossover of sorts back in the day. So basically they were ready to go to country. Well then, and they did. it was basically the Wolf for one song and a little time before and after. And then when they realized that CBS had basically played a big joke on everybody and that Jack was not changing, there was a little bit of silence, and then they went back into playing some oldies music. So, maybe the people at Clear Channel kind of figured it wasn't going to be real, but they were prepared either which way. They were ready to pull the plug on the oldies format and go with classic country instead. So, there's a lot more. Talking about the Wall of Rock with Disney and some of the things they did and some of the station ownerships. We could talk a lot about Minnesota Public Radio and when it bought out WLOL. And we could talk about where KDWB used to be in the company that now owns the station and where WDGY is today and whatnot. But I could go on forever. I just so love radio history. I like to kind of ad-lib these videos, so sometimes they get a little long and all over the place. But, I just wish you'd check out more of radio history. Find out what your stations used to do and what they used to play. And, the stunt where KOOL 108 almost became classic country because Jack FM almost changed formats, which was just a prank. The prank that the new upstart KDWB played against the established WDGY with the Formula 63 bottles and whatnot. There's just some fascinating stories and some fascinating people, and I would love to talk more about it, but, time, it's getting late, and I think we should probably let this video go now. I'm going to do a few more in-depth versions of different stories, but I thought these were some highlights. Like I said, I would love to talk more. Hopefully we can do some more. I'm going to do some more drive-through Bible and some other stuff. Some more of my own stories that I'm going to be doing on this channel. But I hope you enjoy Twin Cities Radio History 101. Have a good day. Be always jovial.